How's everyone doing? Welcome, welcome, welcome. Allow me to adjust a couple things on my end. Claire! How are you doing, Claire? Welcome, welcome. Thank you so much for subscribing for 15 months. That is a lot. That is a long time. A very long time. Hope you are doing well, Claire. Thank you so much for subscribing, and thank you as well for swinging on by. And Song, hello to you as well. Hope you're also doing well. Hope you're all having terrifyingly pleasant time zones. Let me see if I can. I didn't think, because it's been a few. It has been a little bit. So I didn't think to update the scene that I usually do for Horror Story ASMR. It has been a few months. Didn't even think to update things, so I was kind of in a rush to make sure everything was presentable. Gotta get the right mood for what we're about to do this evening. Looking forward to enjoying my night off. Hey, good to hear. I'm glad that you're getting a chance to enjoy some time for yourself. Because we all need that little bit of time to be able to recharge a bit. Let's see if I can pull myself just a little bit. As per usual, be sure to let me know how the audio levels are, because this is a bit of a different kind of stream. A very different kind of vibe. I just bumped my own mic volume up just a little bit, hopefully just enough to get that right tickle in for those who are wearing headphones. It is Horror Story ASMR time. For those who have not been to one of the previous sessions, basically, I recite some particular tales of terror, some stories of fright, in the kind of tone that you're hearing right now. It's a bit of a more relaxed session, as long as you're not the type to get scared too easily. Think your mic could be louder and everything else a touch down. Alright. Bump it up just a little bit then. There we go. Now, pop the ambience down just a smidge. There we go. Then, let's see. And then, yeah, I think we can bump the overlay elements down a little bit as well to make sure that they're not disruptive. There we go. Got my pop souls, my unholy water, and the lights are off. Perfect. Absolutely perfect. Okay. I'm assuming this thumbs up means that everything is good. Perfect. I'm glad. I want to try and... It's been a little bit. A lot of stuff has been taking my attention over the past few months since the last time we did one of these. So, it's been difficult to find time. But with May, I was able to look at my schedule and be like, okay, I think we can bring this back. I think we can bring this back in good order. Now, I actually have very physical books on hand. Every single one of these tomes has various tales for me to tell you. So, I've pre-selected a couple of stories that have captured my interest. And I hope they capture yours as well. I also hope they don't keep you up too late. Don't want you to have too many nightmares now. The question is, what story should we read first? It's always hard to find something to start off with. You gotta be able to find the story that can give the right mood, set the tone for the remainder of the session, you know? You can't just pick any old tale. It's gotta be one that sticks. It's gotta be one that gets people ready. Give me that bone daddy chills. Oh, hello there, dicks. Welcome, welcome. Hope you're having a terrifyingly pleasant time zone, and I hope you're in for some tales of fright. It is indeed Wednesday. Hello, cutie. Hello, hello, hello. Hope you are also having a terrifyingly pleasant time zone. Let's see. What do you all usually look for in terms of a horror story? Do you look for something pertaining to the occult? Something more mysterious? Something a little more macabre, perhaps? Or maybe all of the above? Because there are multiple different flavors of stories, you know. I've been talking horny on Maine, well, as long as you don't get too carried away with it, or as long as you make sure that people know what to expect. We encourage people to be open and honest. Let's see. Unfortunately, I don't have any tales that can pertain to that particular side of things. Still gotta keep things within TOS after all, because Twitch. But I'll see if we can find various different things. We have multiple different tomes, different books that we can look through, and there's plenty of material that I can pull up at the stroke of a button. Fingers and buttons don't really do strokes, do they? You get what I mean. I was trying a little too hard to be a little clever with my alliteration there. I never claimed to be good at it. What did I come into? Apparently people are already getting a little, rowdy. When we haven't even started reading yet. We haven't even gotten to our first tale yet. How you doing, Panda? Hello, hello. Hope you're having a terrifyingly pleasant time zone. Let's see. Suppose what we can start off with is... allow me to go ahead and get this. Gotta be able to prep this. I want to try and get one of those little book reading stands for these physical books. Mainly because it'd make things easier on me. I can set it right in front of me and be able to open to the exact story that I want and proceed with recounting my chosen tale. That's something to look into for later. Let's see. How about we start here? How about we start here? Let's read a story from H.P. Lovecraft. Now, I don't think I need to remind people that we do not condone Lovecraft's politics. We don't even need to. I don't feel like I need to discuss anything about what Lovecraft's politics were. I feel like if you're a horror fan, you're very aware of his backstory. At the same time, we can still appreciate some of the literary works that he was able to create. Because as controversial a figure that he is and was, he's still a major influence on the horror scene. And this tale, I figured, would be something that would be something interesting to take a look at. This story is called The Thing on the Doorstep. There's a little bit of a pre-word to this as well. Kira, hello, how are you doing? Thank you so much for swinging on by. Hope you're having a terrifyingly pleasant time zone. Good books indeed, good books indeed. Hope you're doing well, Kira. As far as The Thing on the Doorstep, the preamble states, this story was written somewhat frenetically on August 21st through 24th, 1933. Lovecraft admitted that the literary inspiration of the story was H.B. Drake's novel, The Shadowy Thing, from 1928, in which a man develops the power of hypnosis to such a degree that he can exchange personalities with his victim. Lovecraft has altered this plot so that a man and his wife exchange personalities, a detail Lovecraft may have derived from Barry Payne's novel, An Exchange of Souls, from 1911. The character of Asenath Waite appears to be a fusion of Lovecraft's mother and ex-wife, but the character of Edward Derby is not entirely based on Lovecraft himself, instead drawing also upon Lovecraft's views of his friends, Clark Ashton Smith and Frank Belknap Long. The story was published in Weird Tales in January of 1937. This is how I found your channel and what drew me in. I'm glad the stories are back. I'm glad to be able to be doing this again. Again, I apologize it's been so long since the last one. A lot of things have been going on. And a lot of things took priority. But I'm glad we were able to get back to it. The Thing on the Doorstep. It was Amazon. Truly a terrifying entity indeed. You do not want to anger the beast. That is Amazon. Especially if you're trying to form a union. How you doing, Geronimo? How you doing? Thank you so much for swinging on by, and I hope you're having a terrifyingly pleasant time zone. Welcome, welcome. I noticed those patch notes for demonologists, and I just want to say, I find it interesting that there was a patch note detailing the ability to crouch, and it's the first time I've seen such a note in any game I've played ever, and it's hilarious. I had a very sensible and ghoulish chuckle out of it. I caught a cold, so story time is perfect, Remedy. Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. Hope you're able to get better soon. I did catch that you were doing a movie session in your Discord server. You were watching the Super Mario movie, if I recall, the new one. I would have joined in. Unfortunately, I was at work at the time, so I wasn't able to join in. But I hope you enjoyed your movie, and I hope you get well soon. Definitely doing well. First time ASMR I'm hearing here. So, ooh, yeah. People have said that they enjoyed my ASMR voice, and some others have said that they've actually fell asleep to it, which is a huge compliment, really. I'm glad people enjoy these, and once again, I'm glad that we're able to get back to this. It's been a while. It's been a long time. With that said, let's go ahead and get started on The Thing on the Doorstep. It is true that I have sent 6 bullets through the head of my best friend, and I hope to shew by this statement that I am not his murderer. At first, I shall be called a madman, madder than the man I shot in a cell at the Arkham Sanitarium. Later, some of my readers will weigh each statement, correlate it with the known facts, and ask themselves how I could have believed otherwise than as I did after facing the evidence of that horror. That thing on the doorstep. Until then, I also saw nothing but madness in the wild tales I have acted on. Even now, I ask myself whether I was misled, or whether I am not mad after all. I do not know, but others have strange things to tell of Edward and Asenath Derby, and even the stolid police are at their wits' end to account for that last terrible visit. They have tried weakly to concoct a theory of a ghastly jest or warning by discharged servants, yet they know in their hearts that the truth is something infinitely more terrible and incredible. So I say that I have not murdered Edward Derby. Rather, I have avenged him, and in so doing, purged the earth of a horror whose survival might have loosed untold terrors on all mankind. There are black zones of shadow close to our daily paths, and now and then some evil soul breaks a passage through. When that happens, the man who knows must strike before reckoning the consequences. I have known Edward Pickman Derby all his life. 8 years my junior, he was so precocious that we had much in common from the time he was 8 and I 16. He was the most phenomenal child scholar I have ever known, and at 7 was writing verse of somber, fantastic, almost morbid cast which astonished the tutors surrounding him. Perhaps his private education and coddled seclusion had something to do with his premature flowering. An only child, he had organic weaknesses, which startled his doting parents and caused them to keep him closely chained to their side. He was never allowed out without his nurse, and seldom had a chance to play unconstrainedly with other children. All this doubtless fostered a strange, secretive inner life in the boy, with imagination as his one avenue of freedom. Turn down the audios of my game so it's going to make running from animatronics more interesting. I would agree. That would make things a lot more interesting. At any rate, his juvenile learning was prodigious and bizarre, and his facile writings such as to captivate me despite my greater age. About that time, I had leanings toward art of a somewhat grotesque cast, and I found in this younger child a rare kindred spirit. What lay behind our joint love of shadows and marvels was no doubt the ancient, moldering, and subtly fearsome town in which we lived, which cursed, legend-haunted Arkham, whose huddled, sagging gambrel roofs and crumbling Georgian balustrades brood out the centuries beside the darkly muttering Miskatonic. As time went by, I turned to architecture, and gave up my design of illustrating a book of Edward's demonic poems, yet our comradeship suffered no lessening. Young Derby's odd genius developed remarkably, and in his 18th year his collected nightmare lyrics made a real sensation when issued under the title Azathoth and Other Horrors. He was a close correspondent of the notorious Baudelarian poet Justin Geoffrey, who wrote The People of the Monolith and died screaming in a madhouse in 1926 after a visit to a sinister, ill-regarded village in Hungary. In self-reliance and practical affairs, however, Derby was greatly... There's a hard R word here that I'd rather not repeat on stream, so what word should we replace with this? What word should we... challenged, I guess. Greatly challenged because of his coddled existence. His health had improved, but his habits of childish dependence were fostered by over-careful parents, so that he never traveled alone, made independent decisions, or assumed responsibilities. It was early seen that he would not be equal to a struggle in the business of professional arena, but the family fortune was so ample that this formed no tragedy. As he grew to years of manhood, he retained a deceptive aspect of boyishness. Blond and blue-eyed, he had the fresh complexion of a child, and his attempts to raise a mustache were discernible only with difficulty. His voice was soft and light, and his pampered, unexercised life gave him a juvenile chubbiness rather than the paunchiness of premature middle age. He was of good height, and his handsome face would have made him a notable gallant, had not his shyness held him to seclusion and bookishness. Derby's parents took him abroad every summer, and he was quick to seize on the surface aspects of European thought and expression. His Poe-like talents turned more and more toward the decadent and other artistic sensitivenesses. That is a word. Sensitivenesses and yearnings were half aroused in him. We had great discussions in those days. I had been through Harvard, had studied in a Boston architect's office, had married, and had finally returned to Arkham to practice my profession, settling in the family homestead in Salenstall Street, since my father had moved to Florida for his health. Edward used to call almost every evening, till I came to regard him as one of the household. He had a very characteristic way of ringing the doorbell or sounding the knocker that grew to be a veritable code signal, so that after dinner I always listened for the familiar 3 brisk strokes, followed by 2 more after a pause. Less frequently, I would visit at his house and note with envy the obscure volumes in his constantly growing library. Furious Ninetail, hello, hello. Thank you for the follow. Welcome to the spooky zone. Like your character? It's amazing. Thank you so much. I am glad you enjoy it. And thank you so much for coming on by. And I hope you're in a comfortable spot to get nice and cozy for some horror stories. Come on in, come on in. Don't mind the ghouls. Red, hello to you as well. Hello, hello, hello.
Meow, 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 meow.
Corey says hi too. Corey says hi too. How you doing, Red? Hope you're having a terrifyingly pleasant time zone. Let's continue. Derby went through Miskatonic University in Arkham, since his parents would not let him board away from them. He entered at 16 and completed his course in 3 years, majoring in English and French literature and receiving high marks in everything but mathematics and the sciences. He mingled very little with the other students, though looking enviously at the darling or bohemian set, whose superficially smart language and meaninglessly ironic pose he aped, and whose dubious conduct he wished he dared adopt. What he did do was become an almost fanatical devotee of subterranean magical lore, for which Miskatonic's library was and is famous. Always a dweller on the surface of fantasy and strangeness, he now delved deep into the actual runes and riddles left by a fabulous past for the guidance of puzzlement of posterity. Losing my words, apologies. He read things like the frightful Book of Ibon, the Unausprechlichen Kulten of von Junst, and the forbidden Necronomicon of the mad Arab Abdul al-Hazred, although he did not tell his parents he had seen them, Edward was 20 when my son and only child was born, and seemed pleased when I named the newcomer Edward Derby Upton after him. By the time he was 25, Edward Derby was a prodigiously learned man, and a fairly well-known poet and fantasticist. I'm probably going to butcher this word. Fantasiste. Though his lack of contacts and responsibilities had slowed down his literary growth by making his products derivative and overbookish. I was perhaps his closest friend, finding him an inexhaustible mine of vital theoretical topics, while he relied on me for advice in whatever matters he did not wish to refer to his parents. He remained single, more through shyness, inertia, and parental protectiveness than through inclination, and moved in society only to the slightest and most perfunctory extent. When the war came, both health and ingrained timidity kept him at home. I went to Plattsburgh for a commission, but never got overseas. So the years wore on. Edward's mother died when he was 34, and for months he was incapacitated by some old psychological malady. His father took him to Europe, however, and he managed to pull out of his trouble without visible effects. Afterward, he seemed to feel a sort of grotesque exhilaration, as if of partial escape from some unseen bondage. He began to mingle in the more advanced college set, despite his middle age, and was present at some extremely wild doings. On one occasion, playing heavy blackmail, which he borrowed of me, to keep his presence at a certain affair from his father's notice. Some of the whispered rumors about the wild Miskatonic set were extremely singular. There was even talk of black magic, and of happenings utterly beyond credibility. When are you reading my Immortal? You know, I was actually looking for input on what to do for the charity stream next week for World Goth Day, and my Immortal was actually brought up as a possibility of something to do. But I thought about it. I was about to do that as well. But I thought about it, and I'm like, what could I do to actually encourage people to donate? And I figured Elden Ring Randomizer would be a better choice in that respect, because I could create donation incentives to get people to torture me a little bit, so to speak. But I do have my Immortal bookmarked, possibly for a future read-along, if I can rope a couple people in to help provide voices, because I don't know if I can read that whole thing on my own. I would probably end up giving up through sheer insanity. Told you it's a hit. I know. A lot of people want to hear it. It's hilariously cursed and very bad. One day, maybe. One day. I may put an incentive for... I think I actually had it as an incentive on the last subathon I did. So if I do another like subathon, donathon, any other kind of thon, possibly, I may put that as an incentive, a goal, perhaps, if we reach a certain milestone. Because if you want to see me torture myself with that kind of literature that badly, we're gonna have to make it interesting. I'm intrigued to see what it's about now. It's described as the worst Harry Potter fanfic ever conceived. It's the edgiest piece of fanfiction quite possibly ever typed out on a keyboard. That's my understanding of it, at the very least. But that's for another day. that's for another day. Moving on. Edward was 38 when he met Asenath Waite. She was, I judge, about 23 at the time, and was taking a special course in medieval metaphysics at Miskatonic. The daughter of a friend of mine had met her before, in the high school at Kingsport, and had been inclined to shun her because of her odd reputation. She was dark, smallish, and very good looking except for over protuberant eyes, but something in her expression alienated extremely sensitive people. It was, however, largely her origin and conversation which caused average folk to avoid her. She was one of the Innsmouth Waites, and dark legends have clustered for generations about crumbling, half-deserted Innsmouth and its people. There are tales of horrible bargains about the year 1850, and of a strange element not quite human in the ancient families of the run-down fishing port. Tales such as only old-time Yankees can devise and repeat with proper awesomeness. Asenath's case was aggravated by the fact that she was Ephraim Waite's daughter, the child of his old age by an unknown wife who always went veiled. Ephraim lived in a half-decayed mansion in Washington Street, Innsmouth, and those who had seen the place, Aughrim folk avoid going to Innsmouth whenever they can, declared that the attic windows were always boarded, and that strange sound sometimes floated from within as evening drew on. The old man was known to have been a prodigious magical student in his day, and legend averred that he could raise or quell storms at sea according to his whim. I had seen it once or twice in my youth, as he came to Arkham to consult forbidden tomes at the college library, and had hated his wolfish, saturnine face with its tangle of iron-gray beard. He had died insane, under rather queer circumstances, just before his daughter, by his will made a nominal ward of the principal, entered the Hall School. But she had been his morbidly avid pupil and looked fiendishly like him at times. The friend whose daughter had gone to school with Asenath Waite repeated many curious things when the news of Edward's acquaintance with her began to spread about. Asenath, it seemed, had posed as a kind of magician at school, and had really seemed to accomplish some highly baffling marvels. She professed to be able to raise thunderstorms, though her seeming success was generally laid to some uncanny knack at prediction. All animals markedly disliked her, and she could make any dog howl by certain motions of her right hand. There were times when she displayed snatches of knowledge and language very singular and very shocking for a young girl, when she would frighten her schoolmates with leers and winks of an inexplicable kind. It would seem to extract an obscene and zestful irony from her present situation. Most unusual, though, were the well-attested cases of her influence over other persons. She was, beyond question, a genuine hypnotist. By gazing peculiarly at a fellow student, she would often give the latter a distinct feeling of exchanged personality, as if the subject were placed momentarily in the magician's body, and able to stare half across the room at her real body, whose eyes blazed and protruded with an alien expression. Asenath often made wild claims about the nature of consciousness and about its independence of the physical frame, or at least from the life processes of the physical frame. Her crowning rage, however, was that she was not a man, since she believed the male brain had certain unique and far-reaching cosmic powers. Given a man's brain, she declared, she could not only equal, but surpass her father in mastery of unknown forces. Edward met Asenath at a gathering of intelligentsia held in one of the students' rooms, and could talk of nothing else when he came to see me the next day. He had found her full of the interest and erudition which engrossed him most, and was in addition wildly taken by her appearance. I had never seen the young woman, and recalled casual references only faintly, but I knew who she was. It seemed rather regrettable that Derby should become so upheaved about her, but I said nothing to discourage him, since infatuation thrives on opposition. He was not, he said, mentioning her to his father. In the next few weeks, I heard of very little but Asenath from young Derby. Others now remarked Edward's autumnal gallantry, although they agreed that he did not look even nearly his actual age, or seem at all inappropriate as an escort for his bizarre divinity. He was only a trifle paunchy despite his indolence and self-indulgence, and his face was absolutely without lines. Asenath, on the other hand, had the premature crow's feet which come from the exercise of an intense will. About this time, Edward brought the girl to call on me, and I at once saw that his interest was by no means one-sided. She eyed him continually with an almost predatory air, and I perceived that their intimacy was beyond untangling. Soon afterward, I had a visit from old Mr. Derby, whom I had always admired and respected. He had heard the tales of his son's new friendship, and had wormed the whole truth out of the boy. Edward meant to marry Asenath, and had even been looking at houses in the suburbs. Knowing my usually great influence with the son, the father wondered if I could help to break the ill-advised affair off, but I regretfully expressed my doubts. This time, it was not a question of Edward's weak will, but of the woman's strong will. The perennial child had transferred his dependence from the parental image to a new and stronger image, and nothing could be done about it. See, this is why I kind of need a little bit of a book holder, so that I don't have to work my back too much. One sec. Because these books do get pretty heavy. These are rather thick tomes after all. Oh, perfect. Thank you, Panda. Thank you for the hydrate and posture check. Oh, there we go. You all make sure you stretch too. Story time indeed. Hello, Buster. How are you doing? Thank you so much for swinging on by. Happy huntings, and I hope you're having a terrifyingly pleasant time zone. Everyone make sure to hydrate as well. Drunk a bit? Well, as long as you're in a safe spot. As long as you're in a safe spot, then that's perfectly fine. Let's see. That's where I was at. The wedding was performed a month later by a justice of the peace, according to the bride's request. Mr. Derby, at my advice, offered no opposition, and he, my wife, my son, and I attended the brief ceremony, the other guests being wild young people from the college. Asenath had bought the old Crown Windshield place in the country at the end of High Street, and they proposed to settle there after a short trip to Innsmouth, whence 3 servants and some books and household goods were to be brought. It was probably not so much consideration for Edward and his father as a personal wish to be near the college, its library, and its crowd of sophisticates that made Asenath settle in Arkham instead of returning permanently home. Does coffee count? I suppose to an extent, although coffee does have a tendency to dehydrate instead of hydrate. As long as you have something to follow it up with. When Edward called on me after the honeymoon, I thought he looked slightly changed. Asenath had made him get rid of the undeveloped mustache, but there was more than that. He looked soberer and more thoughtful, his habitual pout of childish rebelliousness being exchanged for a look almost of genuine sadness. I was puzzled to decide whether I liked or disliked the change. Certainly, he seemed for the moment more normally adult than ever before. Perhaps the marriage was a good thing. Might not the change of dependence form a start toward actual neutralization, leading ultimately to responsible independence? He came alone, for Asenath was very busy. She had brought a vast store of books and apparatus from Innsmouth. Derby shuddered as he spoke the name, and was finishing the restoration of the Crowan Shield house and grounds. Her home in that town was a rather disquieting place, but certain objects in it had taught him some surprising things. He was progressing fast in esoteric lore now that he had Asenath's guidance. Some of the experiments she proposed were very daring and radical. He did not feel at liberty to describe them, but he had confidence in her powers and intentions. The three servants were very queer, an incredibly aged couple who had been with old Ephraim and referred occasionally to him and to Asenath's dead mother in a cryptic way, and a swarthy young wench who had marked anomalies of feature and seemed to exude a perpetual odor of fish. Odor of fish, huh? From Innsmouth? One sec. Pardon me, I had to sneeze, so I'm gonna mute myself so as to not frighten everyone too much. Let's see. Part 3. For the next 2 years, I saw less and less of Derby. A fortnight would sometimes slip by without the familiar 3 and 2 strokes at the front door. And when he did call, or when, as happened with increasing infrequency, I called on him, he was very little disposed to converse on vital topics. He had become secretive about those occult studies which he used to describe and discuss so minutely, and preferred not to talk of his wife. She had aged tremendously since her marriage, till now. Oddly enough, she seemed the elder of the two. Her face held the most concentratedly determined expression I have ever seen, and her whole aspect seemed to gain a vague, unplaceable repulsiveness. My wife and son noticed it as much as I, and we all ceased gradually to call on her, for which, Edward admitted in one of his boyishly tactless moments, she was unmitigatedly grateful. Occasionally, the Derbys would go on long trips, ostensibly to Europe, though Edward sometimes hinted at obscure destinations. It was after the first year that people began talking about the change in Edward Derby. He was very casual talk, for the change was purely psychological, but it brought up some interesting points. Now and then, it seemed, Edward was observed to wear an expression and to do things wholly incompatible with his usual flabby nature. For example, although in the old days he could not drive a car, he was now seen occasionally to dash into or out of the old Crowan Shield driveway with Asenath's powerful Packard, handling it like a master and meeting traffic entanglements with a skill and determination utterly alien to his accustomed nature. In such cases, he seemed always to be just back from some trip or just starting on one. What sort of trip? No one would guess, although he mostly favored the Innsmouth road. Oddly, the metamorphosis did not seem altogether pleasing. People said he looked too much like his wife, or like old Ephraim Waite himself in these moments. Or perhaps these moments seemed unnatural because they were so rare. Sometimes, hours after starting out in this way, he would return listlessly sprawled on the rear seat of his car, while an obviously hired chauffeur or mechanic drove. Although, also, his preponderant aspect on the streets during his decreasing round of social contacts, including, I may say, his calls on me, was the old-time indecisive one, its irresponsible childishness even more marked than in the past. While Asenath's face aged, Edward's, aside from those exceptional occasions, actually relaxed into a kind of exaggerated immaturity, save when a trace of the new sadness or understanding would flash across it. It was really very puzzling. Meanwhile, the Derbys almost dropped out of the gay college circle. Not through their own disgust, we heard, but because something about their present studies shocked even the most callous of the other decadents. It was in the third year of the marriage that Edward began to hint openly to me of a certain fear and dissatisfaction. He would let fall remarks about things going too far, and would talk darkly about the need of saving his identity. At first, I ignored such references, but in time, I began to question him guardedly, remembering what my friend's daughter had said about Asenath's hypnotic influence over the other girls at school. The cases where students had thought they were in her body, looking across the room at themselves. This questioning seemed to make him at once alarmed and grateful, and once he mumbled something about having a serious talk with me later. About this time, old Mr. Derby died, for which I was afterward very thankful. Edward was badly upset, though by no means disorganized. He had seen astonishingly little of his parents since his marriage, for Asenath had concentrated in herself all his vital sense of family linkage. Some called him callous in his loss, especially since those jaunty and confident moods in the car began to increase. He now wished to move back into the old Derby mansion, but Asenath insisted on staying into the Crowenshield house, to which she had become well adjusted. Not long afterward, my wife heard a curious thing from a friend, one of the few who had not dropped the Derbys. She had been out to the end of High Street to call on the couple, and had seen a car shoot briskly out of the drive with Edward's oddly confident and almost sneering face above the wheel. Ringing the bell, she had been told by the repulsive wench that Asenath was also out, but had chanced to look up the house and leaving. There, at one of Edward's library windows, she had glimpsed a hastily withdrawn face, a face whose expression of pain, defeat, and wistful hopelessness was poignant beyond description. It was, incredibly enough in view of its usual domineering cast, Asenath's. Yet the caller had vowed that, in that instant, the sad, muddled eyes of poor Edward were gazing out from it. The plot thickens. Edward's calls now grew a trifle more frequent, and his hints occasionally became concrete. What he said was not to be believed, even in centuried and legend-haunted Arkham, but he threw out his dark lore with a sincerity and convincingness which made one fear for his sanity. He talked about terrible meetings in lonely places of cyclopean ruins in the heart of the Maine woods, beneath which vast staircases led down to abysses of nighted secrets, of complex angles that led through invisible walls to other regions of space and time, and of hideous exchanges of personality that permitted explorations to remote and forbidden places, on other worlds, and in different space-time continua. He would now and then back up certain crazy hints by exhibiting objects which utterly nonplussed me, elusively colored and bafflingly textured objects like nothing ever heard of on Earth, whose insane curves and surfaces answered no conceivable purpose and followed no conceivable geometry. These things, he said, came from outside, and his wife knew how to get them. Sometimes, but always in frightened and ambiguous whispers, he would suggest things about old Ephraim Waite, whom he had seen occasionally at the college library in the old days. These adumbrations were never specific, but seemed to revolve around some especially horrible doubt as to whether the old wizard were really dead, in a spiritual as well as corporeal sense. At times, Derby would halt abruptly in his revelations, and I wondered whether Asenath could possibly have divined his speech at a distance and cut him off through some unknown sort of telepathic mesmerism. Some power of the kind she had displayed at school. Certainly she suspected that he told me things, for as the weeks passed, she tried to stop his visits with words and glances of a most inexplicable potency. With only difficulty could he get to see me, for although he would pretend to be going somewhere else, some invisible force would generally clog his motions or make him forget his destination for the time being. His visits usually came when Asenath was away in her own body, as he once oddly put it. She always found out later. The servants watched his goings and comings, but evidently she thought it inexpedient to do anything drastic. Xtina 2077. Thank you for the follow. Welcome to the spooky zone. Happy hauntings. Hope you are doing well and hope you're having a terrifyingly pleasant time zone. Sorry, my back is really starting to ache. I may switch to online format for the remainder stories, unless I can find a way to prop my books accordingly. Let me see, try something real quick. There, okay. I wonder if I can prop it up like this. Again, this is the other reason why I wanted to get like a proper book stand. Stand? Stone? I want to get a proper book stand, and I believe I have one on Throne, actually, that I saw on Amazon. Relatively inexpensive. Something to be able to prop books on, so that way I can better keep my posture in check while reading these particularly terrifying tales for you. But I hope everyone is enjoying themselves so far. Oh, I like that emote. Haven't been to one of Craven's streams lately. He's another horror creator, horror streamer. I argue that he probably has a much better tone than I do. And at least that's my perspective. I feel he has a much better, like, he's got that sexy tone going for him, that really deep and sexy vocal tone that I can really only dream of obtaining. Where were we? There we go. Let me see if I can prop it like this so I can help a little bit. Part 4. Derby had been married more than 3 years on that August day when I got the telegram from Maine. I had not seen him for 2 months, but had heard he was away on business. Asenath was supposed to be with him, though watchful gossips declared there was someone upstairs in the house behind the doubly curtained windows. They had watched the purchases made by the servants, and now the town marshal of Chosunkuk had wired of the draggled madman who stumbled out of the woods with delirious ravings and screamed to me for protection. It was Edward, and he had been just able to recall his own name by my name and address. Chosunkuk is close to the wildest, deepest, and least explored forest belt in Maine, and it took a whole day of feverish jolting through fantastic and forbidding scenery to get there in a car. I found Derby in a cell at the town farm, vacillating between frenzy and apathy. He knew me at once and began pouring out a meaningless, half-incoherent torrent of words in my direction. Sorry, I had to up my light up a little bit. Dan, for God's sake, the pit of the Shoggoths, down the 6,000 steps, the abomination of abominations. I never would let her take me, and then I found myself there. Ja, Shub die Grath. The shape rose up from the altar, and there were 500 that howled. The hooded thing that bleated, Kamog, Kamog. That was old Ephraim's secret name in the coven. I was there, where she promised she wouldn't take me. A minute before I was locked in the library, and then I was there where she had gone with my body, in the place of utter blasphemy. The unholy pit where the Black Realm begins and the Watcher guards the gate. I saw a Shoggoth. It changed shape. I can't stand it. I won't stand it. I'll kill her if she ever sends me there again. I'll kill that entity. Her, him, it. I'll kill it. I'll kill it with my own hands. Yours fit perfect for the stories, like Mr. Creepypasta. I am not too familiar with Mr. Creepypasta. Is that a particular individual I may need to look up? Because I can always use for more inspiration on how to better improve my storytelling voice. Your tone is great and makes stories in cemetery cinema nights very relaxing and able to hook a person in. Aw, thank you so much, Panda. That means a lot. Oh, he also reads horror stories. It's actually kind of funny. Online creepypasta stories used to be a part of this but I was running into an issue where a number of websites that host creepypasta stories have disclaimers that usually disallow people reading them live on stream or in videos, which threw a bit of a wrench in things for a bit. So I have to see if there's an outlet out there where we can find some proper creepypasta tales that we can read on stream. Let's see. Continuing on. It took me an hour to quiet him, but he subsided at last. The next day I got him decent clothes in the village and set out with him for Arkham. His fury of hysteria was spent, and he was inclined to be silent, though he began muttering darkly to himself when the car passed through Augusta, as if the sight of a city aroused unpleasant memories. It was clear that he did not wish to go home, and considering the fantastic delusions he seemed to have about his wife, delusions undoubtedly springing from some actual hypnotic ordeal to which he had been subjected, I thought it would be better if he did not. I resolved, put him up myself for a time, no matter what unpleasantness it would make with Asenath. Later, I would help him get a divorce, for most assuredly there were mental factors which made this marriage suicidal for him. When we struck open country again, Derby's muttering faded away, and I let him nod and drowse on the seat beside me as I drove. During our sunset dash through Portland, the muttering commenced again, more distinctly than before, and as I listened, I caught a stream of utterly insane drivel about Asenath. The extent to which she had preyed on Edward's nerves was plain, for he had woven a whole set of hallucinations around her. His present predicament, he fumbled furtively, was only one of a long series. She was getting hold of him, and he knew that someday she would never let go. Even now, she probably let him go only when she had to, because she couldn't hold on long at a time. She constantly took his body and went to nameless places for nameless rites, leaving him in her body and locking him upstairs. But sometimes she couldn't hold on. and he would find himself suddenly in his own body again in some far-off, horrible, and perhaps unknown place. Sometimes she'd get hold of him again, and sometimes she couldn't. Often he was left stranded somewhere, as I had found him. Time and again, he had to find his way home from frightful distances, getting somebody to drive the car after he found it. The worst thing was that she was holding on to him longer and longer at a time. She wanted to be a man, to be fully human. That was why she got hold of him. She had sensed the mixture of fine, wrought brain and weak will in him. Someday she would crowd him out and disappear with his body. Disappear to become a great magician like her father, and leave him marooned in that female shell that wasn't even quite human. Yes, he knew about the Innsmouth blood now. There had been traffic with things from the sea. It was horrible. And old Ephraim, he had known the secret, and when he grew old, did a hideous thing to keep alive. He wanted to live forever. Asenath would succeed. One successful demonstration had taken place already. As Derby muttered on, I turned to look at him closely, verifying the impression of change which had earlier scrutiny had given me. Paradoxically, he seemed in better shape than usual, harder, more normally developed, and without the trace of sickly flabbiness caused by his indolent habits. It was as if he had been really active and properly exercised for the first time in his coddled life. And I judged that Asenath's force must have pushed him into unwanted channels of motion and alertness. But just now his mind was in a pitiable state, for he was mumbling wild extravagances about his wife, about black magic, about old Ephraim, and about some revelation which would convince even me. He repeated names which I recognized from bygone browsings in forbidden volumes, and at times made me shudder with a certain thread of mythological consistency, of convincing coherence, which ran through his maundering. Again and again he would pause, as if to gather courage for some final and terrible disclosure. Thank you for the hydrate and posture check, by the way, Valeris. Appreciate it. There we go. Appreciate it. Oh, that felt good. I've been trying to exercise my midsection lately, and I think I may have overdone a little bit yesterday.
You reminded me of my other favorite horror storyteller that I like listening to, which is what drew me in, but you've become my favorite horror content creator.
Aw, thank you so much. Oh, I really appreciate that. I'm listening to save room songs while listening to your ASMR, which makes it more soothing. Oh, is it the Resident Evil save music? Because that's always great. RE1 save room music in particular is very, very soothing indeed. I love scary or creepy stories. I'm glad you are in the right place then, Xtina. Based panda opinions. Let's see. One sec. One more quick hydrate. RE save room with Silent Hill save room music's perfect. Perfect. Interesting enough, the ambience music that I have going on right now is from Fatal Frame. Which we just finished up Fatal Frame 4 fairly recently. I believe this is particular ambience is from Fatal Frame 1. So I hope it fits the mood appropriately. Let's see. Let's continue. Dan, don't you remember him? The wild eyes and the unkempt beard that never turned white. He glared at me once, and I never forgot it. Now she glares that way, and I know why. He found it in the Necronomicon, the formula. I don't dare tell you the page yet, but when I do, you can read and understand. Then you will know what has engulfed me. On, body to body to body. He means never to die. The life glow. He knows how to break the link. It can flicker on a while even when the body is dead. I'll give you hints, and maybe you'll guess. Listen, Dan. Do you know why my wife always takes such pains with that silly backhand writing? Have you ever seen a manuscript of old Ephraim's? Do you want to know why I shivered when I saw some hasty notes Asenath had jotted down? Asenath. Is there such a person? Why did they half think there was poison in old Ephraim's stomach? Why did the Gilmans whisper about the way he shrieked like a frightened child when he went mad and Asenath locked him up in the padded attic room where the other had been? Was it old Ephraim's soul that was locked in? Who locked in whom? Why had he been looking for months for someone with a fine mind and a weak will? Why did he curse that his daughter wasn't a son? Tell me, Daniel Upton, what devilish exchange was perpetrated in the House of Horror, where that blasphemous monster had his trusting, weak-willed, half-human child at his mercy? Didn't he make it permanent, as she'll do in the end with me? Tell me why that thing calls itself Asenath writes differently when off guard, so that you can't tell its script from. Then the thing happened. Derby's voice was rising to a thin, treble scream as he raved, when suddenly it was shut off with an almost mechanical click. I thought of those other occasions at my home when his confidences had abruptly ceased, when I had half fancied that some obscure telepathic wave of Asenath's mental force was intervening to keep him silent. This, though, was something altogether different, and I felt infinitely more horrible. The face beside me was twisted almost unrecognizably for a moment, while through the whole body there passed a shivering motion, as if all the bones, organs, muscles, nerves, and glands were readjusting themselves to a radically different posture, set of stresses, and general personality. Just where the supreme horror lay, I could not for my life tell. Yet there swept over me such a swamping wave of sickness and repulsion, such a freezing, petrifying sense of utter alienage and abnormality, that my grasp of the wheel grew feeble and uncertain. The figure beside me seemed less like a lifelong friend than like some monstrous intrusion from outer space, some damnable, utterly accursed focus of unknown and malign cosmic forces. I had faltered only a moment, but before another moment was over, my companion had seized the wheel and forced me to change places with him. The dusk was now very thick, and the lights of Portland far behind, so I could not see much of his face. The blaze of his eyes, though, was phenomenal, and I knew that he must now be in that queerly energized state, so unlike his usual self, which so many people had noticed. It seemed odd and incredible that listless Edward Derby, he who could never assert himself, and who had never learned to drive, should be ordering me about and taking the wheel of my own car. Yet that was precisely what had happened. He did not speak for some time, and in my inexplicable horror, I was glad he did not. In the lights of Bidford and Saco, I saw his firmly set mouth and shivered at the blaze of his eyes. The people were right. He did look damnably like his wife and like old Ephraim when in these moods. I did not wonder what the moods were disliked. There was certainly something unnatural and diabolic in them, and I felt the sinister element all the more because of the wild ravings I had been hearing. This man, for all my lifelong knowledge of Edward Pickman Derby, was a stranger, an intrusion of some sort from the black abyss. He did not speak until we were on a dark stretch of road, and when he did, his voice seemed utterly unfamiliar. It was deeper, firmer, and more decisive than I had ever known it to be, while its accent and pronunciation were altogether changed, though vaguely, remotely, and rather disturbingly recalling something I could not quite place. There was, I thought, a trace of very profound and very genuine irony in the timbre. Not the flashy, meaninglessly jaunty pseudo-irony of the callow sophisticate, which Derby had habitually affected, but something grim, basic, pervasive, and potentially evil. I marveled at the self-possession so soon following the spell of panic-struck muttering. "I hope you'll forget my attack back there, Upton," he was saying. "You know what my nerves are, and I guess you can excuse such things. I'm enormously grateful, of course, for this lift home. And you must forget, too, any crazy things I may have been saying about my wife, and about things in general. That's what comes from overstudy in a field like mine. My philosophy is full of bizarre concepts, and when the mind gets worn out, it cooks up all sorts of imaginary concrete applications. I shall take a rest from now on. You probably won't see me for some time, and you needn't blame Asenath for it." This trip was a bit queer, but it's really very simple. There are certain Indian relics in the North Woods, standing stones and all that, which mean a good deal in folklore, and Asenath and I are following that stuff up. It was a hard search, so I seem to have gone off my head. I must send somebody for the car when I get home. A month's relaxation will put me back on my feet. I do not recall just what my own part of the conversation was, for the baffling alienage of my seatmate filled all my consciousness. With every moment, my feeling of elusive cosmic horror increased, till at length I was in a virtual delirium of longing for the end of the drive. Derby did not offer to relinquish the wheel, and I was glad of the speed with which Portsmouth and Newburyport flashed by. At the junction where the main highway runs inland and avoids Innsmouth, I was half afraid my driver would take the bleak shore road that goes through that damnable place. He did not, however, but darted rapidly past Rowley and Ipswich toward our destination. We reached Arkham before midnight and found the lights still on at the old Crow and Shield house. Derby left the car with a hasty repetition of his thanks, and I drove home alone with a curious feeling of relief. It had been a terrible drive, all the more terrible because I could not quite tell why, and I did not regret Derby's forecast of a long absence from my company. Notice how the personality of Derby rapidly switched, and he immediately said to disregard everything that had transpired and to not speak ill of Asenath. Curiouser and curiouser and curiouser, don't you think? Part 5. The next 2 months were full of rumors. People spoke of seeing Derby more and more in his new, energized state, and Asenath was scarcely ever in to her few callers. I had only one visit from Edward when he called briefly in Asenath's car, duly reclaimed from wherever he had left it in Maine, to get some books he had lent me. He was in his new state, and paused only long enough for some evasively polite remarks. It was plain he had nothing to discuss with me when in this condition, and I noticed that he did not even trouble to give the old 3 and 2 signal when ringing the doorbell. As on that evening in the car, I felt a faint, infinitely deep horror which I could not explain, so that his swift departure was a prodigious relief. In mid-September, Derby was away for a week, and some of the decadent college set talked knowingly of the matter, hinting at a meeting with a notorious cult leader, lately expelled from England, who had established headquarters in New York. For my part, I could not get that strange ride from Maine out of my head. The transformation I had witnessed had affected me profoundly, and I caught myself again and again trying to account for the thing, and for the extreme horror it had inspired in me. But the oddest rumors were those about the sobbing in the old Crowing Shield house. The voice seemed to be a woman's, and some of the younger people thought it sounded like Asenath's. It was heard only at rare intervals, and would sometimes be choked off as if by force. There was talk of an investigation, but this was dispelled one day when Asenath appeared in the streets and chatted in a sprightly way with a large number of acquaintances, apologizing for her recent absences, and speaking incidentally about the nervous breakdown and hysteria of a guest from Boston. The guest was never seen, but Asenath's appearance left nothing to be said. And then someone complicated matters by whispering that the sobs had once or twice been in a man's voice. One evening in mid-October, I heard the familiar 3 and 2 ring at the front door. Answering it myself, I found Edward on the steps, and saw in a moment that his personality was the old one, which I had not encountered since the day of his ravings on that terrible ride from Chesuncook. His face was twitching with a mixture of odd emotions in which fear and triumph seemed to share dominion, and he looked furtively over his shoulder as I closed the door behind him. Following me clumsily to the study, he asked for some whiskey to steady his nerves. I forbore to question him, but waited till he felt like beginning whatever he wanted to say. At length, he ventured some information in a choking voice. Asenath has gone, Dan. We had a long talk last night while the servants were out, and I made her promise to stop preying on me. Of course, I had certain occult defenses I never told you about. She had to give in, but got frightfully angry. Just packed up and started for New York. Walked right out to catch the 8:20 into Boston. I suppose people will talk, but I can't help that. You needn't mention that there was any trouble. Just say she's gone on a long research trip. She's probably going to stay with one of her horrible groups of devotees. I hope she'll go west and get a divorce. Anyhow, I've made her promise to keep away and let me alone. It was horrible, Dan. She was stealing my body, crowding me out, making a prisoner of me. I laid low and pretended to let her do it, but I had to be on the watch. I could plan if I was careful, for she can't read my mind literally or in detail. All she could read of my planning was a sort of general mood of rebellion, and she always thought I was helpless. Never thought I could get the best of her, but I had a spell or two that worked. Derby looked over his shoulder and took some more whiskey. I paid off those damned servants this morning when they got back. They were ugly about it and asked questions, but they went. They're her kind, Innsmouth people, and were hand in glove with her. I hope they'll let me alone. I didn't like the way they laughed when they walked away. I must get as many of Dad's old servants again as I can. I'll move back home now. I suppose you think I'm crazy, Dan, but Arkham history ought to hint at things that back up what I've told you, and what I'm going to tell you. You've seen one of the changes too, in your car after I told you about Asenath that day coming home from Maine. That was when she got me, drove me out of my body. The last thing of the ride I remember was when I was all worked up trying to tell you what that she-devil is. Then she got me, and in a flash, I was back at the house, in the library where those damned servants had me locked up. And in that cursed fiend's body, that isn't even human, you know, it was she you must have ridden home with, that preying wolf in my body. You ought to have known the difference. I shuddered as Derby paused. Surely I had known the difference. Yet could I accept an explanation as insane as this? But my distracted caller was growing even wilder. I had to save myself. I had to, Dan. She'd have got me for good at Howlmass. They hold a Sabbath up there in Chesuncook, and the sacrifice would have clinched things. She'd have got me for good. She'd have been I, and I'd have been she. Forever. Too late. My body'd have been hers for good. She'd have been a man, and fully human, just as she wanted to be. I suppose she'd have put me out of the way. Killed her own ex-body with me in it. Damn her. Just as she did before. Just as he, or it did before. Edward's face was now atrociously distorted, and he bent it uncomfortably close to mine as his voice fell into a whisper. You must know what I hinted in the car, that she isn't Asenath at all, but really old Ephraim himself. I suspected it a year and a half ago, but I know it now. Her handwriting shews it when she's off guard. Sometimes she jots down a note in writing that's just like her father's manuscripts, stroke for stroke. And sometimes she says things that nobody but an old man like Ephraim could say. He changed forms with her when he felt death coming. She was the only one he could find with the right kind of brain and a weak enough will. He got her body permanently, just as she almost got mine, and then poisoned the old body he put her into. Haven't you seen old Ephraim's soul glaring out of that she-devil's eyes dozens of times, and out of mine when she had control of my body? The whisperer was panting and paused for breath. I said nothing, and when he resumed, his voice was nearer normal. This, I reflected, was a case for the asylum, but I would not be the one to send him there. Perhaps time and freedom from Asenath would do its work. I could see that he would never wish to dabble in morbid occultism again. I'll tell you more later. I must have a long rest now. I'll tell you something of the forbidden horrors she led me into. Something of the age-old horrors that even now are festering in out-of-the-way corners with a few monstrous priests to keep them alive. Some people know things about the universe that nobody ought to know, and can do things that nobody ought to be able to do. I've been in it up to my neck, but that's the end. Today, I burned that damned Necronomicon and all the rest if I were a librarian at Miskatonic. But she can't get me now. I must get out of that accursed home as soon as I can and settle down at home. You'll help me, I know, if I need help. Those devilish servants, you know. And if people should get too inquisitive about Asenath, you see, I can't give them her address. Then there are certain groups of searchers, certain cults, you know, that might misunderstand our breaking up. Some of them have damnably curious ideas and methods. I know you'll stand by me if anything happens, even if I have to tell you a lot that will shock you. I had Edward stay and sleep in one of the guest chambers that night, and in the morning he seemed calmer. We discussed certain possible arrangements for his moving back into the Derby mansion, and I hoped he would lose no time in making the change. He did not call the next evening, but I saw him frequently during the ensuing weeks. We talked as little as possible about strange and unpleasant things, but discussed the renovation of the old Derby house, and the travels which Edward promised to take with my son with me the following summer. Of Asenath we said almost nothing, for I saw that the subject was a peculiarly disturbing one. Gossip, of course, was rife, but that was no novelty in connection with the strange menage at the old Crowenshield house. One thing I did not like was what Derby's banker let fall in an overexpansive mood at the Miskatonic Club about the checks Edward was sending regularly to a Moses and Abigail Sargent and a Eunice Babson in Innsmouth. That looked as if those evil-faced servants were extorting some kind of tribute from him. Yet he had not mentioned the matter to me.
A new mortal has found the cemetery. Enjoy your stay.
Funotai? Let me know how I should pronounce that name. Funo, thank you so much for the follow. Welcome to the spooky zone. Yeah, let me know how I should pronounce your name. For some reason, the pronunciation is throwing me off.
A new mortal has found the cemetery. Enjoy your stay.
Sugar Mama 2007, thank you as well for the follow. Oh, now that is a name. Thank you as well for the follow. Welcome to the spooky zone. Let's see. There we go. I wish that the summer and my son's Harvard vacation would come so that we could get Edward to Europe. He was not, I soon saw, mending as rapidly as I had hoped he would, but there was something a bit hysterical in his occasional exhilaration, while his moods of fright and depression were altogether too frequent. The old Derby house was ready by December, yet Edward constantly put off moving. Though he hated and seemed to fear the Crowenshield place, he was at the same time queerly enslaved by it. He could not seem to begin dismantling things, and invented every kind of excuse to postpone action. When I pointed this out to him, he appeared unaccountably frightened. His father's old butler, who was there with other reacquired family servants, told me one day that Edward's occasional prowlings about the house, and especially down cellar, looked odd and unwholesome to him. I wondered if Asenath had been writing disturbing letters, but the butler said there was no mail which could have come from her. I've missed the stories, but they relax me enough to want to sleep. I consider that a compliment. I think I mentioned this, but people have said that they have fallen asleep during these streams, which is a huge compliment. That people find these relaxing. As long as you're able to have pleasant nightmares, at the very least. Part 6. It was about Christmas that Derby broke down one evening while calling on me. I was steering the conversation towards summer's travels when he suddenly shrieked and leaped up from his chair with a look of shocking, uncontrollable fright, a cosmic panic and loathing such as only the nether gulfs of nightmare could bring to any sane mind. My brain, God, Dan, it's tugging from beyond, knocking, clawing, that she-devil, even now, Ephraim, Kamog, the pit of the Shoggoths, Shub Nigrath, the goat with 1,000 young, the flame, beyond body, beyond life, in the earth. Oh God. I pulled him back to his chair and poured some wine down his throat as his frenzy sank to a dull apathy. He did not resist, but kept his lips moving as if talking to himself. I presently Presently, I realized that he was trying to talk to me, and bent my ear to his mouth to catch the feeble words. Again. She's trying. I might have known. Nothing can stop that force. Not distance, nor magic, nor death. It comes and comes, mostly in the night. I can't leave. It's horrible. Oh, god damn, Dan. If you only knew as I do just how horrible it is. When he had slumped down into a stupor, I propped him with pillows and let normal sleep overtake him. I did not call a doctor, for I knew what would be said of his sanity and wished to give nature a chance if I possibly could. He waked at midnight and I put him to bed upstairs, but he has gone by morning. He had let himself quietly out of the house, and his butler, when called on the wire, said he was at home pacing restlessly about the library. Edward went to pieces rapidly after that. He did not call again, but I went daily to see him. He would always be sitting in his library, staring at nothing and having an air of abnormal listening. Sometimes he talked rationally, but always on trivial topics. Any mention of his trouble, of future plans, or of Asenath would send him into a frenzy. His butler said he had frightful seizures at night, during which he might eventually do himself harm. I had a long talk with his doctor, banker, and lawyer, and finally took the physician with 2 specialist colleagues to visit him. The spasms that resulted from the first questions were violent and pitiable, and that evening a closed car took his poor, struggling body to the Arkham Sanitarium. I was made his guardian and called on him twice weekly, almost weeping to hear his wild shrieks and awesome whispers and dreadful droning repetitions of such phrases as, "I had to do it. I had to do it. It'll get me. It'll get me. Down there in the dark. Mother, Dad, save me, save me." How much hope of recovery there was, no one could say, but I tried my best to be optimistic. Edward must have a home if he emerged, so I transferred his servants to the Derby mansion, which would surely be his sane choice. What to do about the Crowenshield place, with its complex arrangements and collections of utterly inexplicable objects I could not decide, so left it momentarily untouched, telling the Derby housemaid to go over and dust the chief rooms once a week and ordering the furnace man to have a fire on those days. The final nightmare came before the Candlemas, heralded in cruel irony by a false gleam of hope. One morning late in January, the sanitarium telephoned it to report that Edward's reason had suddenly come back. His continuous memory, they said, was badly impaired, but sanity itself was certain. Of course, he must remain some time for observation, but there could be little doubt of the outcome. All going well, he would surely be free in a week. I hastened over in a flood of delight, but stood bewildered when a nurse took me to Edward's room. The patient rose to greet me, extending his hand with a polite smile, but I saw in an instant that he bore the strangely energized personality which had seemed so foreign to his own nature. The competent personality I had found so vaguely horrible, and which Edward himself had once vowed was the intruding soul of his wife. There was the same blazing vision, so like Asenath's and old Ephraim's, and the same firm mouth, and when he spoke, I could sense the same grim, pervasive irony in his voice. The deep irony so redolent of potential evil. This was the person who had driven my car through the night of 5 months before. The person I had not seen since that brief call when he had forgotten the old-time doorbell signal and stirred such nebulous fears in me. And now he filled me with the same dim feeling of blasphemous alienage and ineffable cosmic hideousness. He spoke affably of arrangements for release, and there was nothing for me to do but assent, despite some remarkable gaps in his recent memories. Yet I felt that something was terribly, inexplicably wrong and abnormal. There were horrors in this thing that I could not reach. This was a sane person. But was it indeed the Edward Derby I had known? If not, who or what was it? And where was Edward? Ought it to be free or confined? Ought it to be extirpated from the face of the earth? There was a hint of the abysmally sardonic in everything the creature said. The Asenath-like eyes lent a special and baffling mockery to certain words about the early liberty earned by an especially close confinement. I must have behaved very awkwardly. I was glad to beat a retreat. All that day and the next, I racked my brain over the problem. What happened? What sort of mind looked out through those alien eyes in Edward's face? I could think of nothing but this dimly terrible enigma, and gave up all efforts to perform my usual work. The second morning, the hospital called up to say that the recovered patient was unchanged, and by evening, I was close to a nervous collapse, a state I admit, though all others will vow it colored my subsequent vision. I have nothing to say on this point, except that no madness of mine could account for all the evidence. So, I believe we're getting to the part where Asenath is deciding to take full control by force. I think I'm seeing how this is playing out now. Part 7. It was in the night, after that second evening, that stark, utter horror burst over me and weighted my spirit with a black, clutching panic from which it can never shake free. It began with a telephone call just before midnight. I was the only one up, and sleepily took down the receiver in the library. No one seemed to be on the wire, and I was about to hang up and go to bed when my ear caught a very faint suspicion of sound at the other end. Was someone trying under great difficulties to talk? As I listened, I thought I heard a sort of half-liquid bubbling noise. Glub, 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 which had an odd suggestion of inarticulate, unintelligible word and syllable divisions. I called, "Who is it?" But the only answer was, "Glub, glub, glub, glub." I could only assume that the noise was mechanical, but fancying that it might be a case of broken instrument able to receive but not send, I added, "I can't hear you. Better hang up and try information." Immediately, I heard the receiver go on the hook at the other end. This, I say, was just before midnight. When that call was traced afterward, it was found to come from the old Crowenshield house. That was fully half a week from the housemaid's day to be there. I shall only hint what was found at that house. The upheaval in a remote cellar storeroom, the tracks, the dirt, the hastily rifled wardrobe, the baffling marks on the telephone, the clumsily used stationery, and the detestable stench lingering over everything. The police, poor fools, have their smug little theories and are still searching for those sinister, just discharged servants who have dropped out of sight amidst the present furor. They speak of a ghoulish revenge for things that were done, and say I was included because I was Edward's best friend and advisor. Idiots! Do they fancy those brutish clowns could have forged that handwriting? Do they fancy they could have brought what later came? Are they blind to the changes in that body that was Edward's? As for me, I now believe all that Edward Derby ever told me. There were horrors beyond life's edge that we do not suspect, and once in a while, man's evil pride calls them just within our range. Ephraim, Asenath, that devil called them in, and they engulfed Edward as they are engulfing me. Can I be sure that I am safe? Those powers survive the life of the physical form. The next day, in the afternoon, when I pulled out of my prostration and was able to walk and talk coherently, I went to the madhouse and shot him dead for Edward's and the world's sake. But can I be sure till he is cremated? They are keeping the body for some silly autopsies by different doctors. But I say he must be cremated. He must be cremated. He who is not Edward Derby when I shot him. I shall go mad if he is not, for I may be next. But my will is not weak, and I shall not let it be undermined by the terrors I know are seething around it. One life, Ephraim, Asenath, and Edward, who now, I will not be driven out of my body. I will not change souls with that bullet-ridden lich in the madhouse. But let me try to tell coherently of that final horror. I will not speak of what the police persistently ignored. The tales of that dwarfed, grotesque, malodorous thing met by at least 3 wayfarers on High Street just before 2 o'clock, and the nature of the single footprints in certain places. I will say only that just about 2, the doorbell and knocker, waked me. Doorbell and knocker both plied alternatively and uncertainly in a kind of weak desperation, in each trying to keep to Edward's old signal of 3 and 2 strokes. Roused from sound sleep, my mind leaped into a turmoil. Derby at the door, and remembering the old code. That new personality had not remembered it. Was Edward suddenly back in his rightful state? Why was he here in such evident stress and haste? Had he been released ahead of time? Or had he escaped? Perhaps, I thought, as I flung on the robe and bounded downstairs, his return to his old self had brought raving and violence, revoking his discharge and driving him to a desperate dash for freedom. Whatever had happened, he was good old Edward again, and I would help him. When I opened the door into the elm-arced blackness of a gust of insufferably fetid wind almost flung me prostrate. I choked in nausea, and for a second scarcely saw the dwarfed humped figure on the steps. The summons had been Edward's, but who was this foul, stunted parody? Where had Edward had time to go? His ring had sounded only a second before the door opened. The collar had on one of Edward's overcoats, its bottom almost touching the ground, and its sleeves rolled back yet still covering the hands. On the head was a slouch hat pulled low, while a black silk muffler concealed the face. As I stepped unsteadily forward, the figure made a semi-liquid sound like that I had heard over the telephone. Glub, glub, and thrust at me a large, closely written paper impaled on the end of a long pencil. Still reeling from the morbid and unaccountable fetor, I seized this paper and tried to read it in the light from the doorway. Beyond question, it was in Edward's script. But why had he written when he was close enough to ring? And why was the script so awkward, coarse, and shaky? I could make out nothing in the dim half-light, so edged back into the hall, the dwarf figure clumping mechanically after, but pausing on the inner door's threshold. The odor of this singular messenger was really appalling, and I hoped, not in vain, thank God, that my wife would not wake and confront it. Then, as I read the paper, I felt my knees give under me, and my vision go black. I was lying on the floor when I came to, that accursed sheet still clutched in my fear-rigid hand. This is what it said. Dan, go to the sanitarium and kill it. Exterminate it. It isn't Edward Derby anymore. She got me. It's Asenath, and she has been dead 3 months and a half. I lied when I said she had gone away. I killed her. I had to. It was sudden, but we were alone, and I was in my right body. I saw a candlestick and smashed her head in. She would have got me for good at Hallowmass. I buried her in the farther cellar storeroom under some old boxes and cleaned up the traces. The servants suspected next morning, but they have such secrets that they dare not tell the police. I sent them off, but God knows what they and others of the cult will do. I thought for a while I was all right, but then I felt the tugging at my brain. I knew what it was. I ought to have remembered. A soul like hers, or Ephraim's, is half detached and keeps right on after death as long as the body lasts. She was getting me, making me change bodies with her, seizing my body and putting me in that corpse of hers buried in the cellar. I knew what was coming. That's why I snapped and had to go to the asylum. Then it came. I found myself choked in the dark, in Asenath's rotting carcass down there in the cellar under the boxes where I put it. And I knew she must be in my body at the sanitarium, permanently, for it was after Hallowmass, and the sacrifice would work even without her being there, sane and ready for release as a menace to the world. I was desperate, and in spite of everything, I clawed my way out. I'm too far gone to talk. I couldn't manage to telephone, but I can still write. I'll get fixed up somehow and bring you this last word and warning. Kill that fiend if you value the peace and comfort of the world. See that it is cremated. If you don't, it will live on and on, body to body forever. And I can't tell you what it will do. Keep clear of black magic, Dan. It's the devil's business. Goodbye. You've been a great friend. Tell the police whatever they'll believe, and I'm damnably sorry to drag all this on you. I'll be at peace before long. This thing won't hold together much more. Hope you can read this and kill that thing. Kill it. Yours, Ed. It was only afterward that I read the last half of this paper, for I had fainted at the end of the 3rd paragraph. I fainted again when I saw and smelled what cluttered up the threshold where that warm air had struck it. The messenger would not move or have consciousness anymore. The butler, tougher fibered than I, did not faint at what met him in the hall in the morning. Instead, he telephoned the police. When they came, I had been taken upstairs to bed, but the other mass lay where it had collapsed in the night. The men put handkerchiefs to their noses. What they finally found inside Edward's oddly assorted clothes was mostly liquescent horror. There were bones, too, and a crushed-in skull. Some dental work positively identified the skull as Asenath's. The end. I hope you all enjoyed that. A particularly frightening tale of one individual's desire to live, quite possibly forever, through any means necessary. And for some individuals, that truly does mean any means necessary. Imagine having your entire being transferred outside of your own body and into another person's. You can only imagine the type of mental damage that could cause. It was a great story. It was a good story, I agree. It was a great story. I'm glad you enjoyed it. It was actually surprisingly longer than I expected it to be. But that's fine. We still have other stories that we can recount. And the night is still young, after all. Let's see. What else do I have? Let's see. Actually, I have one online resource, so that I can give my back a bit of a breather. There we go. Wonder if I should look into getting pillows. Try to set some pillows. Here we go. Give myself a quick stretch. Oh, there you go. There we go. That's the ticket. There we go. Gotta make sure to keep everything limber. Okay. And thank you for the hydrate as well. Let's see. Okay. So, I was looking to see. I wanted to get about up to 3, like minimum of 3 stories this evening. The first 2 I was able to find. I was able to decide on relatively quickly. Finding something to do the 3rd story with, that was going to be a little bit tricky, because we were trying to bridge the gap between notable tales. So I looked on I checked an online resource that I bookmarked, and I found one that can help us satisfy that role. Let's see. The story that I have here is The Middle Toe of the Right Foot by one Ambrose Bierce, an American short story writer, journalist, poet, and Civil War veteran. Let's go ahead and read this. This was apparently published in Can Such Things Be? Must have been. I am assuming that is a collection of tales from him. Let's see. Hope everyone is doing well this evening. Hope everyone is enjoying themselves. And hope you're all comfortable. Maybe wrapped up in a blanket or two. Wrapped up, leaning against a pillow, resting comfortably, not paying any mind to the ghouls and ghosts that might be floating about around you, even as we speak. Perhaps something is hiding under the bed. Perhaps a spirit is under the sheets, right next to you. Listening on in as we read these tales of terror. Although some of you may be welcoming those spirits. Most of them tend to be friendly, as long as you don't do anything to cross them. Now then, the story titled The Middle Toe of the Right Foot. It is well known that the old Manton house is haunted, and all the rural district near about, and even in the town of Marshall, a mile away, not one person of unbiased mind entertains a doubt of it. Incredulity is confined to those opinionated persons who will be called cranks, as soon as the useful word shall have penetrated the intellectual demesnes of the Marshall advance. The evidence that the house is haunted is of two kinds: the testimony of disinterested witnesses who have had ocular proof, and that of the house itself. The former may be disregarded and ruled out on any of the various grounds of objection, which may be urged against it by the ingenious. The facts within the observation of all are material and controlling. In the first place, the Manton house has been unoccupied by mortals for more than 10 years, and with its outbuildings is slowly falling into decay, a circumstance which in itself the judicious will hardly venture to ignore. It stands a little way off the loneliest reach of the Marshall and the Harriston Road, in an opening which was once a farm and is still disfigured with strips of rotting fence and half covered with brambles overrunning a stony and sterile soil long unacquainted with the plow. The house itself is in tolerably good condition, though badly weathered and in dire need of attention from the glazier, the smaller male population of the region having attested in the manner of its kind its disapproval of dwelling without dwellers. It is 2 stories in height, nearly square, its front pierced by a single doorway, flanked on each side by a window boarded up to the very top. Corresponding windows above, not protected, serve to admit light and rain to the rooms of the upper floor. Grass and weeds grow pretty rankly all about, and a few shade trees, somewhat the worse for wind, and leaning all in one direction, seem to be making a concerted effort to run away. In short, as the Marshalltown humorist explained in the columns of the Advance, the proposition that the Manton house is badly haunted is the only logical conclusion from the premises. The fact that in this dwelling Mr. Manton thought it expedient one night some 10 years ago to rise and cut the throats of his wife and 2 small children, removing at once to another part of the country, has no doubt done its share in directing public attention to the fitness of the place for supernatural phenomena. To this house, one summer evening, came 4 men in a wagon. 3 of them promptly alighted, and the one who had been driving hitched the team to the only remaining post of what had been a fence. The 4th remained seated in the wagon. "Come," said one of his companions, approaching him while the others moved away in the direction of the dwelling. "This is the place." The man addressed did not move. "By God," he said harshly, "this is a trick. It looks to me as if you were in it." "Perhaps I am," the other said, looking him straight in the face, and speaking in a tone which had something of contempt in it. "You will remember, however, that choice of place was with your own assent left to the other side. Of course, if you are afraid of spooks—" "I am afraid of nothing," the man interrupted with another oath, and sprang to the ground. The 2 then joined the others at the door, which one of them had already opened with some difficulty, caused by rust of lock and hinge. All entered. Inside, it was dark, but the man who had unlocked the door produced a candle and matches and made a light. He then unlocked the door on their right as they stood in the passage. This gave them entrance to a large, square room that the candle but dimly lighted. The floor had a thick carpeting of dust, which had partly muffled their footfalls. Cobwebs were in the angles of the walls and depended from the ceiling like strips of rotting lace and making undulatory movements in the disturbed air. The room had 2 windows in adjoining sides, but from neither could anything be seen except the rough inner surfaces of boards a few inches from the glass. There was no fireplace, no furniture. There was nothing besides the cobwebs and the dust. The 4 men were the only objects there which were not part of the structure. Strange enough, they looked in the yellow light of the candle. The one who had so reluctantly alighted was especially spectacular. he might have been called sensational. He was of middle age, heavily built, deep-chested, and broad-shouldered. Looking at his figure, one would have said that he had a giant's strength, at his features, that he would use it like a giant. He was clean-shaven, his hair rather closely cropped and gray. His low forehead was seamed with wrinkles above the eyes, and over the nose these became vertical. The heavy black brows followed the same law, saved from meeting only by an upward turn at what would otherwise have been the point of contact. Deeply sunken beneath these glowed in the obscure light a pair of eyes of uncertain color, but obviously enough too small. There was something forbidding in their expression, which was not bettered by the cruel mouth and wide jaw. The nose was well enough as noses go. One does not expect much of noses. All that was sinister in the man's face seemed accentuated by an unnatural pallor. He appeared altogether bloodless. Ah, Panda. Good. I was waiting to get to a spot where we can pause at. There we go.
Hope you're enjoying yourself this evening. Thank you so much for redeeming that.
Thank you so much for redeeming that, Panda. Appreciate it. Apologies. Had to catch my breath a little bit there. The appearance of the other men was sufficiently commonplace. They were such persons as one meets and forgets that he met. All were younger than the man described, between whom and the eldest of the others, who stood apart, there was apparently no kindly feeling. They avoided looking at each other. "Gentlemen," said the man holding the candle and keys, "I believe everything is right. Are you ready, Mr. Roser?" The man standing apart from the group bowed and smiled. "And you, Mr. Grossmith?" The heavy man bowed and scowled. "You will be pleased to remove your outer clothing." Excuse me. Their hats, coats, waistcoats, and neckwear were soon removed and thrown outside the door in the passage. The man with the candle now nodded, and the fourth man, he who had urged the Grothsmith to leave the wagon, produced from the pocket of his overcoat 2 long, murderous-looking bowie knives, which he drew now from their leather scabbards. "They are exactly alike," he said, presenting one to each of the 2 principals. For by this time, the dullest observer would have understood the nature of this beating. It was to be a duel to the death. Each combatant took a knife, examined it critically near the candle, and tested the strength of the blade and handle across his lifted knee. Their persons were then searched in turn, each by the second of the other. "If it is agreeable to you, Mr. Grothsmith," said the man holding the light, "you will place yourself in that corner." He indicated the angle of the room farthest from the door. Whether Grothsmith retired, his second parting from him with a grasp of the hand which had nothing of cordiality in it. In the angle nearest the door, Mr. Roser stationed himself, and after a whispered consultation, his second left him, joining the other near the door. At that moment, the candle was suddenly extinguished, leaving all in profound darkness. This may have been done by a draught from the open door. Whatever the cause, the effect was startling. "Gentlemen," he said, a voice which sounded strangely unfamiliar in the altered condition, affecting the relations of the senses. "Gentlemen, you will not move until you hear the closing of the outer door." A sound of trampling ensued, then the closing of the inner door, and finally the outer one closed with a concussion which shook the entire building. A few minutes afterward, a belated farmer's boy met a light wagon which was being driven furiously toward the town of Marshall. He declared that behind the two figures on the front seat stood a third, with its hand upon the bowed shoulders of the others, who appeared to struggle vainly to free themselves from its grasp. This figure, unlike the others, was clad in white and had undoubtedly boarded the wagon as it passed the haunted house. As the lad could boast a considerable former experience with the supernatural thereabouts, his word had the weight justly due to the testimony of an expert. The story, in connection with the day's events, eventually appeared in the Advance, with some slight literary embellishments and the concluding intimation that the gentleman referred to would be allowed to use the paper's columns for their version of the night's venture. But the privilege remained without a claimant. A duel in a haunted mansion in complete darkness. Interesting. The events that led up to this duel in the dark were simple enough. One evening, 3 young men of the town of Marshall were sitting in a quiet corner of the porch of the village hotel, smoking and discussing such matters as 3 educated young men of a southern village would naturally find interesting. Their names were King, Sancher, and Rosaire. At a little distance, within easy hearing, but taking no part in the conversation, sat a fourth. He was a stranger to the others. They merely knew that on his arrival by the stagecoach that afternoon, he had written in the hotel register the name of Robert Grossmith. He had not been observed to speak to anyone except the hotel clerk. He seemed, indeed, singularly fond of his own company, or as the personnel of the Advance expressed it, grossly addicted to evil associations. But then it should be said in justice to the stranger that the personnel was himself of a too convivial disposition fairly to judge one differently gifted, and had moreover experienced a slight rebuff in an effort at an interview. "I hate any kind of deformity in a woman," said King, "whether natural or acquired. I have a theory that any physical defect has its correlative mental and moral defect." Well, King is certainly a prize pick, isn't he? "I infer then," said Rosa gravely, "that a lady lacking the moral advantage of a nose would find the struggle to become Mrs. King an arduous enterprise." "Of course you may put it that way," was the reply. "But seriously, I once threw over a most charming girl on learning quite accidentally that she had suffered an amputation of a toe. My conduct was brutal, if you like, but if I had married that girl, I should have been miserable for life, and should have made her so." "Whereas," said Sancher with a light laugh, "by marrying a gentleman of more liberal view, she escaped with a parted throat." "Ah, you know who I'm refer. Yes, she married Manton, but I don't know about his liberality. I'm not sure before he cut her throat because he discovered that she lacked that excellent thing in woman, the middle toe of the right foot." "Look at that chap," said Roser in a low voice, his eyes fixed upon the stranger. That chap was obviously listening intently to the conversation. "Damn his impudence," muttered King. "What ought we do?" "That's an easy one," Rosa replied, rising. "Sir," he continued, addressing the stranger, "I think it would be better if you would remove your chair to the other side of the veranda. The presence of gentlemen is evidently an unfamiliar situation to you." The man sprang to his feet and strode forward with clenched hands, his face white with rage. All were now standing. Sancher stepped between the belligerents. "You are hasty and unjust," he said to Roser. "This gentleman has done nothing to deserve such language." But Roser would not withdraw a word. By the custom of the country and the time, there could be but one outcome to the quarrel. "I demand the satisfaction due to a gentleman," said the stranger, who had become more calm. "I have not an acquaintance in this region. Perhaps you, sir, bowing to Sancher, will be kind enough to present me in this matter. Sancher accepted the trust, somewhat reluctantly it must be confessed, for the man's appearance and manner were not at all to his liking. King, who during the colloquy had hardly removed his eyes from the stranger's face and had not spoken a word, consented with a nod to act for Roser, and the upshot of it was that, the principals having retired, a meeting was arranged for the next evening. The nature of the arrangements had been already disclosed. The duel with knives in a dark room was once a commoner feature of southwestern life than it is likely to be again. How thin a veneering of chivalry covered the essential brutality of the code under which such encounters were possible, we shall see. Oh, Panda recounting when she came into the channel. Oh, scared me enough that I made a whole Discord call ask if I was okay. Oh, I'm glad I had that effect on you. Very glad indeed. Part 3 of this tale. In the blaze of a midsummer noonday, the old Manton house was hardly true to its traditions. It was of the earth, earthy. The sunshine caressed it warmly and affectionately, with evident disregard of its bad reputation. The grass screening all the expanse in its front seemed to grow, not rankly, but with a natural and joyous exuberance, and the weeds blossomed quite like plants. Full of charming lights and shadows and populous with pleasant-voiced birds, the neglected shade trees no longer struggled to run away, but bent reverently beneath their burdens of sun and song. Even in the glassless upper windows was an expression of peace and contentment, due to the light within. Over the stony fields, the visible heat danced with a lively tremor incompatible with the gravity, which is an attribute of the supernatural. Such was the aspect under which the place presented itself to Sheriff Adams and 2 other men who had come out from Marshall to look at it. One of these men was Mr. King, the sheriff's deputy. The other, whose name was Brewer, was a brother of the late Mrs. Manton. Under a beneficent law of the state relating to property, which has been for a certain period abandoned by an owner whose residence cannot be ascertained, the sheriff was legal custodian of the Manton farm, and appurtenances thereunto belonging. His present visit was in mere perfunctory compliance with some order of a court, in which Mr. Brewer had an action to get possession of the property as heir to his deceased sister. By mere coincidence, the visit was made on the day after the night that Deputy King had unlocked the house for another and very different purpose. His presence now was not of his own choosing. He had been ordered to accompany his superior, and at the moment could think of nothing more prudent than simulated alacrity in obedience to the command. Carelessly opening the front door, which to his surprise was not locked, the sheriff was amazed to see, lying on the floor of the passage into which it opened, a confused heap of men's apparel. Examination showed it to consist of 2 hats and the same number of coats, waistcoats, and scarves, all in a remarkably good state of preservation, albeit somewhat defiled by the dust in which they lay. Mr. Brewer was equally astonished, but Mr. King's emotion is not of record. With a new and lively interest in his own actions, the sheriff now unlatched and pushed open the door on the right, and the 3 entered. The room was apparently vacant. No, as their eyes became accustomed to the dimmer light, something was visible in the farthest angle of the wall. It was a human figure, that of a man crouching close in the corner. Something in the attitude made the intruders halt when they had barely passed the threshold. The figure more and more clearly defined itself. The man was upon one knee, his back in the angle of the wall, his shoulders elevated to the level of his ears, his hands before his face, palms outward, the fingers spread, crooked like claws. The white face turned upward on the retracted neck had an expression of unutterable fright, the mouth half open, the eyes incredibly expanded. He was stone dead, yet with the exception of a bowie knife, which had evidently fallen from his own hand, not another object was in the room. In thick dust that covered the floor were some confused footprints near the door and along the wall through which it opened. Along one of the adjoining walls, too, past the boarded-up windows, was the trail made by the man himself in reaching his corner. Instinctively, in approaching the body, the three men followed that trail. The sheriff grasped one of the outthrown arms. It was as rigid as iron, and the application of a gentle force rocked the entire body, without altering the relation of its parts. Brewer, pale with excitement, gazed intently into the distorted face. "God of mercy," he suddenly cried. "It is Manton." "You're right," said King, with an evident attempt at calmness. "I knew Manton. He then wore a full beard and his hair long, but this is he." He might have added, "I recognized him when he challenged Rosser. I told Rosser and Sancho who he was before we played him this horrible trick. When Rosser left this dark room at our heels, forgetting his outer clothing in the excitement, and driving away with us in his shirt sleeves, all through the discreditable proceedings we knew with whom we were dealing, murderer and coward that he was. But nothing of this did Mr. King say. With his better light, he was trying to penetrate the mystery of the man's death. That he had not once moved from the corner where he had been stationed, that his posture was that of neither attack nor defense, that he had dropped his weapon, that he had obviously perished of sheer horror, and something that he saw. These were circumstances which Mr. King's disturbed intelligence could not rightly comprehend. Groping in intellectual darkness for a clue to his maze of doubt, his gaze, directed mechanically downward in the way of one who ponders momentous matters, fell upon something which there, in the light of day, and in the presence of living companions, affected him with terror. In the dust of years that lay up thick upon the floor, reaching from the door by which they had entered straight across the room to within a yard of Manton's crouching corpse, were three parallel lines of footprints, light but definite impressions of bare feet. The outer ones, those of small children, the inner, a woman's. From the point at which they ended, they did not return. They pointed all one way. Brewer, who had observed them at the same moment, was leaning forward in an attitude of rapt attention, horribly pale. "Look at that," he cried, pointing with both hands at the nearest print of the woman's right foot, where she had apparently stopped and stood. "The middle toe is missing. It was Gertrude." Gertrude was the late Mrs. Manton, sister to Mr. Brewer. The mystery of who the woman with the missing middle toe. Interesting. Well, interesting. I will say, this. I will take a guess that Mr. King and his fellow cohorts get no bitches. With mindsets like that, nah, you can tell they don't get bitches. None of them get bitches. Otherwise, they wouldn't be bothered by such simple things as someone missing a toe, for example. That's an interesting tale. Very interesting tale indeed. What do you all think? What do you all think? I did find it curious as to why they chose a dark room in a haunted house to do the duel at. Although, then you recall the scene of all three of them leaving in a rush, and the man that was being challenged left there to contend with the entity that resided in the mansion. A rather cruel trick there. Interesting tale indeed. Okay. I'd say we have enough time for one more tale of terror. The duel in the dark reminded me of one of my favorite phrases, though. Favorite phrases? I'm curious. I'm trying to think of any particular phrases that would apply to this. Oh. Dicks. Thank you for the hydrate. I shall indeed take a sippy. I noticed that my throat was kind of getting a little scrungly there, so this will probably be our last story for the evening. But it was also one that was requested on the previous horror story evening. We couldn't get to, I opted to not do it then because we had already done a tale by this author that same evening. So I made a promise that we would read this the next time we did one of these. It took a little bit. But I can say I can at least say that I'm holding on to my promise. I don't know if the person that initially made the request is in chat right now, but I'm sure if they end up seeing the VOD, this one's for you. This is a story from my own personal favorite horror author, Edgar Allan Poe, and it's the story, The Telltale Heart. Prop this up there. There we go. There we go. True. Nervous. Very, very dreadfully nervous. I had been and am. But why will you say that I am mad? The disease had sharpened my senses, not destroyed, not dulled them. Above all was the sense of hearing acute. I heard all things in the heaven and in the earth. I heard many things in hell. How then am I mad? Hearken and observe how healthily, how calmly I can tell you the whole story. It is impossible to say how the first idea entered my brain, but once conceived, it haunted me day and night. Object, there was none. Passion, there was none. I loved the old man. He had never wronged me. He had never given me insult. For his gold, I had no desire. I think it was his eye. Yes, it was this. He had the eye of a vulture, a pale blue eye with a film over it. Whenever it fell upon me, my blood ran cold, and so, by degrees, very gradually, I made up my mind to take the life of the old man, and thus rid myself of the eye forever. Now this is the point. You fancy me mad. Madmen know nothing, but you should have seen me. You should have seen how wisely I proceeded With what caution, with what foresight, with what dissimulation I went to work. I was never kinder to the old man than during the whole week before I killed him. And every night, about midnight, I turned the latch of his door and opened it, oh so gently. And then, when I had made an opening sufficient for my head, I put in a dark lantern, all closed, that no light shone out, and then I thrust in my head. Oh, you would have laughed to see how cunningly I thrust it in. I moved it slowly, very, very slowly, so that I might not disturb the old man's sleep. It took me an hour to place my whole head within the opening so far that I could see him as he lay upon his bed. Would a madman have been so wise as this? And then, when my head was well in the room, I undid the lantern cautiously, oh so cautiously, for the hinges creaked. I undid it just so much that a single thin ray fell upon the vulture eye. And this I did for 7 long nights. Every night, just at midnight. But I found the eye always closed, and so it was impossible to do the work, for it was not the old man who vexed me, but his evil eye. And every morning, when the day broke, I went boldly into the chamber and spoke courageously to him, calling him by name in a hearty tone and inquiring how he has passed the night. So you see, he would have been a very profound old man, indeed, to suspect that every night, just at 12, I looked in upon him while he slept. What's up, Midnight? Sorry. Midnight just came out from her sleeping place, and I think she's gonna be wanting out, so allow me to step away just a brief moment. There you are. Hi. Yes, I see you. I see you, Midnight. Okay. Let me go ahead and tend to my cats real quick, and then we'll continue this tale. One moment, please. Okay. I am back. There we go. There we go. Okay. Just get myself set back up here. Hope everyone is enjoying themselves. Apologies for that little bit of a delay there. The phrase is a quote from one of my favorite books. My sanity will fail me long before my will does. Luckily, the only thing more interesting than a madman is a relentless one. Lothair Daciano. That is a very good phrase indeed. I am not familiar with Lothair Daciano. I may have to look them up. I will have to look them up. Let's see, where were we? Right there. Upon the 8th night, I was more than usually cautious in opening the door. A watch's minute hand moves more quickly than did mine. Never before that night had I felt the extent of my own powers, of my sagacity. I could scarcely contain my feelings of triumph. To think that there I was, opening the door, little by little, and he not even to dream of my secret deeds or thoughts. I fairly chuckled at the idea, and perhaps he heard me, for he moved on the bed suddenly, as if startled. Now, you may think that I drew back, but no. His room was as black as pitch, with the thick darkness, but the shutters were closed, fastened through fear of robbers. And so, I knew that he could not see the opening of the door, and I kept pushing it on steadily. I had my head in and was about to open the lantern when my thumb slipped upon the tin fastening, and the old man sprang up in bed crying,
"Who's there?"
I kept quite still and said nothing. For a whole hour I did not move a muscle, and in the meantime, I did not hear him lie down. He was still sitting up in the bed, listening, just as I have done, night after night, hearkening to the death watches in the wall. Presently I heard a slight groan, and I knew it was the groan of mortal terror. It was not a groan of pain or of grief. Oh no. It was the low, stifled sound that arises from the bottom of the soul when overcharged with awe. I knew the sound well. Many a night, just at midnight, when all the world slept, it has welled up from my own bosom, deepening with its dreadful echo the terrors that distracted me. I say I knew it well. I knew what the old man felt and pitied him, although I chuckled at heart. I knew that he had been lying awake ever since the first slight noise, when he had turned in the bed. One sec, I think Midnight's trying to get my attention again. Apologies. Apparently Midnight wanted to let herself back into the room really badly, so she just let herself in. Sorry about that. It's the ASMR. I'm fucking scared now. You should be. You should be. Hello there, Val. How are you doing? Welcome, welcome, welcome. Hold on. Allow me to get myself in position proper. There we go. How are you doing, Val? Thank you so much for swinging on by. Hope you're having a terrifyingly pleasant time zone. You too abandoned a bad dragon toy. How are you doing as well? Thank you also for coming on by. Welcome, welcome. Hope you're also having a terrifyingly pleasant time zone. Let's see. Let's go ahead and let's continue. Where did I leave off? Where did I leave off before my cat distracted me? Ah, here we go. His fears had been ever since growing upon him. He'd been trying to fancy them causeless, but could not. He had been saying to himself, It's nothing but the wind and the chimney. It is only a mouse crossing the floor. Or, it is merely a cricket which has made a single chirp. Yes, he had been trying to comfort himself with these suppositions, but he had found all in vain. All in vain. Because death, in approaching him, had stalked with his black shadow before him and enveloped the victim. And it was the mournful influence of the unperceived shadow that caused him to feel, although he neither saw nor heard, to feel the presence of my head within the room. Got home from night shift, gonna finish my 6 beers and go to bed. Sounds like you had a long shift. Well, I hope you're able to get plenty of rest. Feel free to get cozy. This is, in fact, our last story of the evening, so you came at a pretty good time. Get yourself comfortable, because the real fear is starting for this tale. When I had waited a long time, very patiently, without hearing him lie down, I resolved to open a very, very little crevice in the lantern. So I opened it. You cannot imagine how stealthily, until at length a simple dim ray, like the thread of the spider, shot from out the crevice and fell full upon the vulture eye. It was open, wide open, and I grew furious as I gazed upon it. I saw it with perfect distinctness, all the dull blue with a hideous veil over it that chilled the very marrow in my bones. But I could see nothing else of the old man's face or person, for I had directed the ray, as if by instinct, directly upon the damned spot. And have I not told you that what you mistake for madness is but over-acuteness of the senses? Now I say, there came to my ears a low, dull, quick sound, such as a watch makes when enveloped in cotton. I know that sound well, too. It was the beating of the old man's heart. It increased my fury as the beating of a drum stimulates the soldier into courage. But even yet I refrained and kept still. I scarcely breathed. I held the lantern motionless. I tried how steadily I could maintain the ray upon the eye. Meantime, the hellish tattoo of the heart increased. It grew quicker and quicker and louder every instant. The old man's terror must have been extreme. It grew louder, I say, louder every moment. Do you mark me well? I have told you that I am nervous. So I am. And now, at the dead hour of the night, amid the dreadful silence of that old house, so strange a noise as this excited me to uncontrollable terror. Yet for some minutes longer I refrained and stood still. But the beating grew louder. I thought the heart must burst. And now a new anxiety seized me. The sound would be heard by a neighbor. The old man's hour had come. With a loud yell, I threw open the lantern and leaped into the room. He shrieked once only. In an instant, I dragged him to the floor and pulled the heavy bed over him. I then smiled gaily to find the deed so far done. But for many minutes, the heart beat on with a muffled sound. This, however, did not vex me. It would not be heard through the wall. At length, it ceased. The old man was dead. I removed the bed and examined the corpse. Yes, he was stone dead. I placed my hand upon the heart and held it there many minutes. There was no pulsation. He was stone dead. His eye would trouble me no more. Sour Patch 09, thank you for the follow. Welcome to the Spooky Zone. Welcome. Hope you are doing well. We are reading The Tale of the Telltale Heart by one Edgar Allan Poe. So, get comfortable. Go ahead and get comfy. All the lights off, full screen, just the light of the candle, and your ghostly model is just perfect for the atmosphere. Oh, I thought about trying to set my area up in a very similar manner, but I do need to still be able to read these books after all. I think for the next time I do one of these, I'll see if I can get some extra candles and then make sure I have the singular light that's able to shine on the books that I am reading to really set that mood in. You ever been so stoned before that you thought you were dead? Oh, you. Oh, you. Oh, you.
mortal has found the cemetery. Enjoy
Green
your
Bay,
stay.
1988. Thank you for the follow. Welcome to the spooky zone. Welcome, welcome. Hope you're doing well. Quick question. Do you read one long story or several shorter ones? Hello there, Loti. How you doing, Loti-sama? For these particular sessions, we read several short horror stories. The longest one we read was one from H.P. Lovecraft this evening, but I usually try to make sure we're able to read at least 3 short horror tales in a given session. And this is actually our last tale of the evening, so came in at a pretty good time. How are you doing, by the way, Loti? Thank you so much for swinging on by, and I hope you're also having a terrifyingly pleasant time zone. Let's... one sec. There we go. Let's continue. If you still think me mad, you will think so no longer when I describe the wise precautions I took for the concealment of the body. The night waned and I worked hastily, but in silence. First of all, I dismembered the corpse. I cut off the head and the arms and the legs. I then took up 3 planks from the flooring of the chamber and deposited all between the scantlings. I then replaced the boards so cleverly, so cunningly that no human eye, not even his, could have detected anything wrong. There was nothing to wash out, no stain of any kind, no blood spot whatsoever. I had been too wary for that. A tub had caught all. When I had made an end of these labors, it was 4 o'clock, still dark as midnight. As the bell sounded the hour, there came a knocking at the street door. I went down to open it with a light heart. For what had I now to fear? There entered 3 men, who introduced themselves with perfect suavity as officers of the police. A shriek had been heard by a neighbor during the night. Suspicion of foul play had been aroused. Information had been lodged at the police office, and they, the officers, had been deputed to search the premises. Hello there, handsome spoopy boy. Hello there to you as well, Hexy. How are you doing? Welcome, welcome. Hope you're having a terrifyingly pleasant time zone. Doing good? Thanks for asking. How about you? Doing pretty well. Doing pretty well. My throat is starting to get a little agitated, so this will in fact be our last story of the evening, but it was one that was requested on the previous horror story session that we did, so I figured it would be a good one to end on. Let's see. I smiled. For what had I to fear? I bade the gentleman welcome. The shriek, I said, was my own in the dream. The old man, I mentioned, was absent in the country. I took my visitors all over the house. I bade them search. Search well. I led them at length to his chamber. I showed them his treasures, secure, undisturbed. In the enthusiasm of my confidence, I brought chairs into the room and desired them here to rest from their... Ow. Ow. While I myself, in the wild audacity of my perfect triumph, placed my own seat upon the very spot beneath which reposed the corpse of the victim. Oh, Panda. Yes, this is essentially how our, I guess, protagonist is feeling in this moment.
Good.
He's very proud of himself and his deeds. ASMR nut, huh? Hadn't really thought about that. Thank you for the redeem as well, Val. Let's see. The officers were satisfied. My manner had convinced them. I was singularly at ease. They sat, and while I answered cheerily, they chatted of familiar things. But ere long, I felt myself getting pale and wished them gone. My head ached, and I fancied a ringing in my ears, but still they sat and still chatted. The ringing became more distinct. It continued to be and became more distinct. I talked more freely to get rid of the feeling, but it continued and gained definiteness, until at length I found that the noise was not within my ears. No doubt I grew very pale, but I talked more fluently and with a heightened voice. Yet the sound increased. And what could I do? It was a low, dull, quick sound, much such a sound as a watch makes when enveloped in cotton. I gasped for breath, and yet the officers heard it not. I talked more quickly, more vehemently, but the noise steadily increased. I arose and argued about trifles in a high key and with violent gesticulations, but the noise steadily increased. Why would they not be gone? I paced the floor to and fro with heavy strides, as if excited to fury by the observations of the men, but the noise steadily increased. Oh God, what could I do? I foamed, I raved, I swore. I swung the chair upon which I had been sitting and grated it upon the boards, but the noise arose over all and continually increased. It grew louder, 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 and still the men chatted pleasantly and smiled. Was it possible they heard not? Almighty God, no, no. They heard, they suspected, they knew. They were making a mockery of my horror. This I thought, and this I think. But anything was better than this agony. Anything was more tolerable than this derision. I could bear those hypocritical smiles no longer. I felt that I must scream or die, and now, again, hark! Louder, 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 louder! Villains! I shrieked. Dissemble no more. I admit the deed. Tear up the planks. Here, here. It is the beating of his hideous heart. The end. A fascinating tale. Our protagonist insists that he is of sound mind, that he is, quite frankly, not mad. And yet, he goes into so much detail of his own deeds and how he essentially outed himself in the end. Was it guilt? Was it in fact insanity? Was it something else entirely? Was it the spirit of the old man that he had killed in cold blood? These are the things that make this story interesting. And the confidence he had, the absolute confidence he had in thinking that he had pulled off the perfect crime. It's a karmic moment. It's a karmic moment. Sounds of souls screaming in fear, the most beautiful of music. I agree. I agree. Quote comes back to play here. I suppose it would apply here as well, wouldn't it? Alas, we're at the time of the night where we should be closing things down. but I wanted to very particularly finish on that on that one particular tale, because for one, it's Edgar Allan Poe, favorite horror author. Did we get through a Wednesday night without it being sus? I think for the most part we were able to, kind of, sort of. Although I did raise an eyebrow when there was mention of the men just taking off all of their clothes before taking part in a duel. Some very kinky duels, apparently. Some very kinky duels. We should talk about your car's extended warranty. No, let us not. Let us not talk about that. Let us not talk about such things. I refuse to discuss such things. But we shall go ahead and close things down here for tonight.
It's always said that the best things happen in the dark.
You're absolutely right, Corey. You're absolutely right. I hope you all enjoyed our tales of terror this evening, and apologies again for the long gap between these sessions. I can't recall when the last one was exactly, but I know it was like before the end of the year, before the end of 2022. I think I'm partially feeling sleepy, even if it's 2 p.m. Thank you for the ASMR stream. Very much welcome. You're very much welcome, Kira. And thank you all for hanging out. As a friendly reminder, this Friday, we will be streaming more Demon Souls. So, if tonight was more relaxing for you, expect chaos to return on Friday. As far as the weekend goes, there will be no Saturday stream, since I will be out and about, but the crypt will be open on Sunday. So if you're wanting to listen to some gothic music, which is appropriate because it's the day before World Goth Day, feel free to swing on by. Think this was the first one I got to be a part of since subscribing to you. Ah, I'm glad you were able to join us then. I'm glad you were able to join us then, Song. Definitely tune in on time the next horror story reading. I'm glad. Thank you for the relaxing horror stories. Thank you for coming on by. And hopefully the gap between here today and the next session won't be as long. Hopefully there won't be as long of a gap between now and the next reading session that we do. Because I really do enjoy these. Sorry, I just bumped the microphone. Also, Jayok Love Games. Let me know if I'm pronouncing that correctly. Thank you for the follow. Welcome to the Spooky Zone. When is the next Cemetery Cinema night? Cemetery Cinema occurs on the last Friday of every month. But in this case, it would be next week. So we'll be gathering for our monthly movie night then. I haven't been able to decide on what movie to watch yet. Well, I'll take a look and see what I can find. Yes, okay, thank you. I was hoping I pronounced it right. Sorry, my throat is starting to get a little scrungly on me, so I think it might be best for us to close things down before I overstrain it too much. For the people that are new here, I have an outro sequence that I play, which allows me time to see if we can find someone to raid. So, feel free to stick around and we'll see if we can find someone to send some spooky vibes to. Until next time, thank you for watching. Thank you for hanging out. Don't forget to take care of yourselves. Be good to each other. Rest well, everyone.
And pleasant nightmares.
They're eating her! And then they're going to eat me! Oh my god!
What is it? What's wrong, sister?
Not misguided at all. I know your heart. It is filled with darkness, even though you are curiously attractive for a fishman.
I don't know about it. I just don't know.
Take a look at this.
I kick ass for the Lord!